And then I think we're going to start, and I'm going to welcome Petra, President of European Cities Marketing, to start the webinar. Petra, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Signe, and thank you, dear ECM friends and colleagues. Real great thank you so much for your participation in another ECM webinar. Situation is changing fairly quickly now, and since we are slowly returning to public life, our virtual socializing is even more appreciated and valuable. During the whole crisis, we continue to believe in perspective and resilience. And today we are pleased to continue this series of initiatives to keep on sharing our experiences, seek inspiration, and of course, support in each other. Since a couple of weeks, the world is opening for travel movements again, yay, but one step at a time. The reopening and potential recovery of the world's most consequential sector starts from there, from now. The knock-on effect of us DMOs is real. City taxes and membership incomes received are reduced. Public spendings are coming under the pressure. However, we must have a central role. We must inspire the confidence. We must be the key players that unite our partners and create a shared visions which answer the question, what will a successful recovery look like for our city? How can we prioritize our work in order to steer towards a more sustainable future? Demand for public resources is intense. While meetings, conferences, and leisure tourism is one of the economic sectors seeking government support and prioritization. This makes it more important than ever to demonstrate how our sector, meaning tourism and meetings, can contribute to the city's lasting recovery and develop in a more sustainable, community, and environmental friendly way. It is also the time to ask, how has COVID-19 changed the way consumers approach to their travel decisions? How could or how should businesses adapt to this? This is why today we will discuss plans to build sustainable recovery. Who better than EplerWood, who will share cutting-edge ideas on how to finance a sustainable recovery for global destinations, calling for a renewed discussion on public-private efforts to redirect and retool our tourism industry. We all need help in setting new, holistic objectives and key metrics for destination management, because now it is time to build back better, new tomorrow of sustainable tourism beyond the urge to return to business as usual. We will also explore what has changed in the strategic outlook for urban tourism and for European city DMOs with three of our very knowledgeable CEOs from Hamburg, from Helsinki, and from Madrid. With Miguel, Laura, and Michael, we will be discussing how the recovery will shape the future of tourism in their cities and the role of their DMOs in the recovery phase and beyond. What do they see as the major change and challenges ahead, and how are they planning to adapt? So let's go to business. Thank you again, Group Now, for supporting us in this valuable initiative. And I leave the floor, the virtual floor, back to you, Signe, who will, knowledgeable as always, moderate the session today.
We've talked a lot about the crisis, and I'm sure now you're all intensively following borders opening and restrictions either being lifted or maintaining, restaurants, attractions, and so on. You're probably also discussing how you can get through a summer season of less travelers, with domestic tourists, trying to get your locals to be tourists in their own city, attracting visitors from nearby markets, and working with your stakeholders on preparing them for what's coming next, looking at trends and data. And I think probably also a lot of you are under pressure from a lot of sides, from your industry, who's also under pressure itself, and from the city decision and policymakers who, you know, all want the DMO to be, as ever, part of the solution, solving the problem, bringing back all the tourists and winning back what has been lost. And all the while, I guess you're also, a lot of you, in budget challenges, in immense financial problems, with cutbacks, budget cuts, loss of revenue, very different situations across all of you, but I'm sure challenging. And at the same time, we see governments and cities using this opportunity to make major changes. So we have Milan and London out reducing car traffic, pedestrianizing, introducing bicycle infrastructure, Amsterdam introducing their donut economy model, shifting from economic growth as the overall paradigm to a new model of thriving cities in balance with the planet. And in many ways, I think we're standing at a crossroads. And that's what today is about. Today is about the long-term change, because even though we're standing at this crossroads, it's quite easy to miss the sign because we're just exiting the road of crisis, you could say. And so for weeks, it's been a key discussion. What can we expect next? Are we going back to normal, or are we looking ahead to a new normal or a next normal? In Copenhagen, for example, the sun has been out for days, which is quite, you know, unusual in Copenhagen. And so all us pale, sun-deprived Danes, we are out. And we're forgetting about social distancing. We forgot about our fear of corona, and we're fighting to get that one spot in the sun, in the parks and nearby the waters. And so the media and all the experts are out, busy pointing to this as evidence that we're all just going to go back to normal. And in many ways, I think that's also part of a hope. You know, we all have hope to go back to something more recognizable. And we have this hope also because new normal in the minds of a lot of people looks a little bit like this. Oops, have to move here. It's a dystopic new normal. It's a dystopic new normal that's based on pictures that we've seen throughout the crisis of social distancing and no facial expression and lack of human contact. But the future is not simply given. It's shaped by the choices we make. And that's why we're at a crossroads. So on our way to recovery, what choices are we making? What are our challenges and pressures? And how do we work towards more resilient destinations, sustainable tourism as part of that recovery? So that's why I am very excited about today, because we have some very, very smart, forward-thinking and challenging people with us here today to help explore the answers to all these questions of next normal or back to normal, but the other way around. So I hope you're all set, because we're almost ready to welcome our first speaker, a global expert and impressive forward thinker on sustainable tourism, Miguel EplerWood, Managing Director of Sustainable Tourism Asset Management Program of Cornell University, Director of International Sustainable Tourism Initiative with Harvard University, and owner of EplerWood International. Miguel actually just published a new white paper on how financing sustainable recovery for global destinations, on how to finance, sustainable recovery for global destinations, and building on the much praised earlier report on the invisible burden of tourism, which some of you have probably come across. Miguel is joining us to restart our discussion on how to plan for a sustainable recovery beyond the immediate panic and urge, which many of us feel, to return to business as usual. So Miguel, please welcome, and please, the floor is yours.
Ignis, thank you so much. This is such a wonderful time to be here. And Petra, thank you on behalf of all of us here in America for having us come to Europe to join you today. I couldn't be speaking on a more topical moment, I think, with this the subject of the speech called the Marshall Plan for Tourism, which is, of course, one of the best examples ever of European and American cooperation. So I was inspired, in fact, to write this white paper by the European Commission's own materials on the subject that came out in April. And I went to my colleagues and I said, I really think the time is now to talk about cooperation and how can we use this concept of cooperation to create what I'm now calling a game plan. I'm even advancing it further for financing sustainable destination recovery. So thank you for having me today. So, as we all know, we've had quite a roller coaster ride. I don't need to spend much time on these statistics, but it was very important, of course, to talk about it. What an amazing thing that we're experiencing and how traumatic it is. So this famous graph on the top of the economy that we've had for so many years in a constant upward slope, except for 2 periods of time, really. And now seeing these historic fall, which is now, as we know, the most drastic fall in our economy in history, at least recorded history. Yeah. So what does that mean? And I think we're all looking for inspiration. I certainly am. And I attended a seminar just last week with John Elkington, who was the sustainability expert that coined the term triple bottom line. And I was very inspired by his presentation. It was interesting what he had to say, that pandemics, as we have been feeling and really know, is that they accelerate existing trends. We can see that in the travel and tourism economy. And they bring out a new type of capitalism that is really going to ask us to think more creatively. We already had a creative economy, certainly, but this is pushing us and is pushing me. I think all of you feel this, right? It's this sense of like, how do we respond? What's the best way to do it? And where are we going to go? And that creates both creativity and innovation that can ultimately lead to what Elkington is calling regeneration. So it's so important to consider the positive side of what we're going through. So when I was experiencing this too, as we all have been, I had to think a lot, of course, as both an academic and consultant, about how are we going to actually manage the recovery. I didn't have to do as many day-to-day responsibilities as you, because a lot of our efforts were actually allowing me to put out further thought pieces. So here's what I came up with. And what we know from history is that if you want to have a successful recovery, you cannot rely just on market strategies. And this actually fits right into my larger set of recommendation, which is that our field needs more investment. And I've been thinking about this for a long time, because as a sustainability expert, there's plenty of evidence that we're not getting enough investment. And a case must be made, though. We can't just assume that we're going to see a sustainable recovery. I think all of us know in our hearts that that won't happen unless we're extremely strategic about what happens next. So I decided to write this paper, A Marshall Plan for Tourism, Can We Build It? So here's what happened. The European Commission came out in April with this Marshall Plan idea. And as an American, especially in a country that's in crisis right now, I was so happy to see them using that term. And I used that as my launch point, not for just European and American cooperation, but for global cooperation in future. And how would we do it? If there was this opportunity to target new investment, how do we do it? And of course, we all know, we're all strategic planners, that in the end, we have to have a targeted set of objectives. We can't just expect things to happen in order to attract this new wave of finance that should be driven by sustainability to regenerate the tourism industry. So if we go back just for a minute to the publication that came out, and it's hard to believe, a year ago, March 2019, The Invisible Burden of Tourism. In that publication, which we did with Cornell and the Travel Foundation, we made a case for more strategic planning as part of the DMOs responsibility, or as part of the larger government responsibility for tourism in future. And these are the checklists that we like to bring out. There's many discussions that we've already had on this topic, but if you want to have a look at the publication, you'll see that it makes a really strong case for using this type of strategic vision in order to create a new type of regenerative tourism. So, and also the big case that we came up with is that really we're not measuring properly, and that many of our destinations in the over-tourism period, which will come back, are seeing a tremendous drain on their resources. But they don't know how to actually measure that, because that type of measurement does not come into the domain of our standard tourism agencies. So in fact, what we have is an uncoordinated effort to try and make sustainability work without an adequate budget. So how can we change that? I think it's extremely important to think about that. It couldn't be more important now. So as we look at a recovery and regeneration, first thing we really have to honestly do is policy review. If we all want to become destination management organizations, some of you are more advanced in this area than other, and I've discussed that with Signe, but nonetheless, this type of new form of governance that I use in my presentation will maybe take it even to another level, because in the end, the DMO has a certain very strong set of responsibilities that they will not be able to absorb all of the responsibilities that might ultimately go to local authorities, and that is local asset management. In future, we're going to have to monitor our consumption of resources and make sure that our infrastructure use is not overburdened. And that includes our internal intellectual capital can be overburdened in that we won't know exactly how to spend our money unless we're measuring. So this is very critical at this moment. So what kind of measurements are needed? I think it's such an honor really to be speaking to all of you from all these beautiful European historic cities. And so this is very much in your domain. How are you going to measure in future what is actually benefiting your cities and what is not? And I know many of you have been working on this, but we at Harvard, which I'll talk about, have come up with some science-based data systems that would also fit into the local participation processes that I know all of you are considering, and then ultimately create a science-based monitoring system. And we really recommend that. So this we now have come to call the holistic accounting system to manage the measurements. And the objective is to provide local governments with this type of holistic accounting to measure the consumption of resources and monitor progress so that we know how much tourism is costing us. And so that research my company has done together with the Harvard Chan School of Public Health in order to test these kinds of systems so that they can be, you know, almost, they're not plug and play yet, but they are on the verge of becoming plug and play. So how do we then use that data? This is also work that we've done at Harvard. We can't just use it in Excel spreadsheets or even software. Ultimately, we're going to have to put that data into GIS, and I see that many of you have been starting to do that. I would advocate that we start cooperating more region-wide throughout the world, but certainly within Europe, to use this kind of data to do better decision-making and assist in the development plans for tourism on a regional basis. Now, why am I talking about that today? Because it will be fundamental to getting financing sources for the transition to a green tourism economy. And it will help us to understand what are the policy pathways to manage tourism sustainably in future. So what we've been thinking a lot about on my team is how can we work with DMOs and build capacity to strategically plan growth. And we have a really strong goal at hand, which is to develop an international certified downloadable program on sustainable destination management with the UNWTO Academy. We have the curriculum ready. We're trying to put together all of the materials behind the scene, come up with all the vital agreements still that we're working on. But the goal is to be online and globally available by 2021. And our academic partner there is Cornell. So what are we hoping to, talk about, and how are we going to attract investment? New models that we really, ask you to consider. This is long-term or I'd call it midterm thinking, is that we'll have to, as part of our new financing approach, is guide investment into the vital infrastructure, which again includes personnel that has value for both local people and visitors. How are we going to manage this investment? Who's going to do the measurements? What is the local capacity to deal with all of the demand on your historic and natural resources? And then, of course, I think we all know we have to spread benefits to small business and local entrepreneurs, and that, of course, we have to make sure that any new tourism development is climate friendly and supports the protection of vital ecosystems. So what are some of the potential objectives? Obviously, this is a very short presentation today. It's a kind of a like, I'm going to put a ball in the air here for you right now. This is like up to you to take a look at this and see how you might want to hit this ball. But some of the objectives that we're suggesting for you, which you would have to review and decide upon, is improving your value-added results, protecting your assets, ensuring that you have climate-friendly infrastructure, and that your local people are equal beneficiaries to the transition to a sustainable economy, and then ultimately create platforms that can be transparent and measured via a region-wide system. I know these are very, very ambitious goals, but they're not impossible. We know that. And so then, if you were to have a system like this, you can then set sustainable financing goals. And here's what, this is very early. This is the first time I've made this presentation, by the way. Review European-wide approach to raise standards for destination management. Discuss objectives with the regional European, banking institutions, and review and shape the European Commission's own ideas for regeneration. I've read that paper very carefully, and I can tell you that there could be a lot of work done to improve upon that. I know they're talking about it themselves, but why not take ownership of that process? And then develop clear policy framework for new sustainable finance mechanisms. So what would this look like? Here's all the types of finance that we're studying on my team. Fiscal recovery infusions, which of course would be what's happening right now. Private equity impact funding. I've spent a lot of time looking at this. This is really a very important source of funding for you. Not to mention green climate finance, green bonds, the reallocation of your tourism tax funds, and then sustainable tourism trust funds, which we talk about in the invisible burden, which are already in place in places like Mallorca. So what's the game plan? This is the first time I presented this as well. I suggest these policy mechanisms that you have need some retooling, and that the destination objectives can come out of that process, and the clear measurements will then be possible. And then ultimately your capacity to manage a sustainable destination economy will be increased enormously. That's so important. And then ultimately, if you have those goals, you can then discuss these goals with your regional finance institutions and ultimately have a strategy for sustainable finance of your destination economies. So I hope that was helpful. It was a very quick run through of an extremely important topic, and I look forward to any questions you might have both during and after this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan. That was brilliant, and actually quite cool that we were the very first ones to hear this presentation from you. I know your white paper is very new. We have a question that came in here. It's something that you and I also discussed before, and I think it's something that's on the minds of a lot of people. But there's a lot of eagerness, a lot of pressure to regain for quick recovery and regain what has been lost. Do you think that they'll keep in mind their good words towards sustainable tourism? And I might add to that, or what can we do to help them keep that in mind?
I'm sorry, who will keep, I'm sorry, can you rephrase the question just a little? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so do you think that the industry or the government, city government or national governments, because they're so focused on rebuilding, on recovery, and it has to be quick, right? So the question here is, do you think that they will actually keep in mind sustainable tourism?
Oh, I see.
And can we do something to help them keep that in mind?
I think that's why I'm focusing on the regions and the European Commission and some of your larger regional bodies. I understand that there's going to be different levels of responsibility, and some of your authorities are certainly going to be focusing just on the emergency basis. But I do believe that if your regional authorities begin to work on recovery, there's going to be an enormous amount of money at play. That we know. And so if there's any opportunity for any organization to bring in a set of objectives, as I've just described, to work with your region or even with the European Commission itself, I highly recommend it. The more coordinated you are, the more that will ultimately help to finance in a big way the transition that I'm talking about.
So do you see, because I also had a question come in via the chat for me, the question is, a lot of the DMOs are somehow, in very complex stakeholder structures with big industry on the board or the city decision makers on the board. So do you see the DMO taking on a new role more as an advocate for this, or how do you see that happening?
Well, I think that that the DMOs can either advocate for it depending on their structure, as was being mentioned. Sometimes it might be difficult, but not always. I think that what I'm trying to show is that the DMO can, yes, play a pivotal role if they can, carve out the capacity, which is why you and I discussed how important capacity would be in order to create that transitional moment so that all the stakeholders can understand those goals and then go after it from there. Yeah, so it's always tricky, but getting that momentum, especially in a time of crisis, I understand can be difficult, which is why folks like me are around, really, is to kind of point, signal, signpost, as they say, hey, this is possible, and it could change the whole game as to how things transpire in the future.
I think that actually segues us into the question here from Bart in Ghent, which is, one of the issues for a lot of DMOs, I think, in advocating this and in working with this is data. And Bart writes that Ghent is developing an integrated set of indicators measuring social, economic, and ecologic impact on tourism. Of tourism, we still need to include waste production and water use in the data, and that's where the regional dimension comes in. However, quality of data is not always high. How do we tackle this? We're the end users.
Well, absolutely. We found that to be one of the challenges as well. And when I was in Copenhagen with you, Signe, I went and met with your green Copenhagen authorities there. And I think slowly but surely we're going to have to create entities like this, what we call data centers. In my meetings with, say, Edinburgh as well, there was that same concern about, wait, are we sure we have the data available? But my team that has done this research finds that you ultimately can use sensors for this. Everyone's pretty excited about the sensors and how they will ultimately automate the whole process. Well, now it seems pretty clunky, and I get that. Slowly but surely, we'll be able to automate the whole thing. And that's like totally, at the Harvard School of Public Health, they already say that's a done deal. It could definitely happen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And now we have a question here from another sustainable tourism expert. Guy Bigwood is asking, can you share your view on how to approach on building a portfolio on different types of financing mechanisms? Because what he's seen is that more than one type is required.
Yes, well, thank you for that question. I'm spending a lot of time thinking about that because obviously we're going to want to blend public and private, and that's going to be our big challenge, which is why, I see all of you as being the sort of spirit behind the public, right? It's essentially, what do we need as public or public-private entities? So we have to know what we need first, right? That's why I was really talking about objectives. Finance can only respond when there is very strong set of objectives. But once we have them, we can certainly, help to shape, I believe, the public funding recovery and blend it with the private impact funds. And amazingly, honestly, this paper's been out, 2 weeks? I've already had a private impact investment group come to me to talk about how they can shape a sustainable, what they're going to call hospitality recovery impact fund. So that's very encouraging. As we know, throughout the world, we have, less in Europe, but in most of the world, we have this incredible amount of money in the 1% category. And I was just reading that in the US stock market, it's much smaller than it was in the past because so much of the money has gone outside of public stock markets now. It's actually means that more than ever we have private equity money available. So that private equity money is one of our goals and targets, to shape them as well to help with this type of recovery. And that's where you end up with the idea of blending the public and private resources. But certainly we've been looking at the climate funds as well. And we're definitely still on the front end of studying this.
And I think you and I talked a little bit about this as well, but I'd like to take that up as well. The skill set that we have now within tourism, but also especially within destinations. Do you think that matches this ambition of sustainable recovery, or where can we work with this? Are we ready to work with this?
Well, no, I think that we need some additional capacity, and I don't think the folks that visit Stockholm would mind if I said that, you know, I sat down with them when I was in Stockholm this last fall, and they told me, for example, on the cruise ship front that, you know, they're being asked to negotiate with large cruise lines. I think that's a really urgent situation. I teach a course on that includes cruise lines and how we manage them and what we do with them in ports. Think of the importance of that. And so obviously we need to create a higher level of capacity within our very pivotal DMOs and local authorities. I do see it as a local, and as we know, often the ports are even a different authority, right? And so there will have to be this sense of creating a strategic plan that goes above the DMO. But I do believe the DMO can be a major part of that, yes. But the capacities will have to be increased, and certainly the folks that visit Stockholm were all for it. And so I'll be very interested to hear what your reactions are, you know, as we continue this process.
And then finally, let's finish on perhaps hopefully a positive note, because I know you talk about the invisible burden of tourism. Is there an invisible potential that we need to celebrate as we recover, as we rebuild?
Oh, well, yes, I think all of us can do nothing but be inspired by our industry and how it brings international cooperation. This is a wonderful example right here. We have a chance of working together as a global community, as a bilateral set of communities between all of your cities, in order to create a vision that can perhaps advance sustainability on the planet. I think that's pretty exciting.
That is pretty exciting. Thank you so much, Megan. So interesting. We'll see if there are any more questions that tick in. Thank you. With these three brave and forward-thinking CEOs of DMOs, who have, you know, as we've all been in this together, but also in very different contexts and different destinations, of course, who all have different structures and frameworks. So they have different experiences and different thoughts on the future. So I'm going to welcome Michael Otremba, CEO of Hamburg Tourism Board, Laura Aalto, CEO of Helsinki Marketing, and Miguel Sanz of Madrid Destino. So if you guys can all unmute and video yourself, or what you say, so we can see you. I see you, Michael.
Hello.
Laura and Miguel, right, there we go. I don't see Laura though. Maybe Julie, you can help Laura unmute and video herself, and then I'll start with a question to Michael, I think. So Michael, I'd say to you, like, what's your key focus right now? Are you preparing for reopening, and where do you see yourself in a phase, you could say? We've all seen like this response or recovery, or are you like further ahead already re-strategizing for the next years?
Well, I'd say in the midst of everything, it's still crisis management and crisis response, meaning also bringing this company through the crisis, because we're dependent on our own revenues. On the other side, it's planning recovery and helping, also being like the first aid for a lot of partners here in Hamburg who really fight for their economical existence, and trying to make our first steps in terms of changing maybe the strategy, which is really an important issue from my point of view, because this crisis is also a change and it can define a new role for us. But I'd say, yeah, we're in the midst of everything. And yesterday there was the new coalition agreement coming out, because you were asking which role plays sustainability. And the title of the new agreement is Confident, Solidary, Sustainable, Shaping Hamburg's Future Sustainably. So maybe this also gives an answer to the role sustainability could play.
And Miguel, in Madrid, are you talking sustainability as part of the recovery?
Yes, I think same as Michael, we are pretty much still in on the recovery, but also on the everyday trying to help businesses and travel trade partners to survive, and especially small and medium-sized members of or partners of ours who are having a hard time just to think of how they will, if they will open in a few days. Then recovery has to be sustainable, or it won't be a proper recovery. Because what I don't think we can do is go back to the same problems we had 6 months ago with the new problems that this crisis has brought. So that would make travel trade, I mean, the tourism sustainable for our own destinations, and now in Madrid is a priority, and it is one of the forces that the city government wants to push to help the recovery of the entire city, but it has to be done in a sustainable way.
But what can you do for the small businesses, as you say?
Well, we're trying to help them to navigate through the state aid that is in place. Sometimes for the small and medium-sized businesses, it's very difficult to navigate through all the paperwork and the administrative work that they have to do. It's a simple and very hard work that you have to do, and we have done, as ECM is doing, we have done a number of webinars to go with them through the legal aspects of the crisis, what to do with workforce, what options are there, not to fire people straight away, if they have options to have some help from the different levels of government, regional, local, or national government. We are trying to all our campaigns now have focus on bringing customers to those businesses that are primarily tourist addressed to the tourists or are for the tourists. But now that we don't have tourists in the city, we have to drive local Madrileños to those businesses so they can survive until we have visitors. So it's a matter of readdressing our priorities and strategies. So not before we were taking visitors to the city so they can go to these small and medium-sized businesses. Now is taking these Madrileños who haven't, they are not very familiar with these businesses in some cases, to bring them there and help them to survive.
And Laura, then to you, where is your key focus right now? Because I think, like Miguel is saying, there's a lot of focus on getting the locals to see the value of tourism and using it. Are you primarily focusing on that, or where are you at now?
Well, we are at this time we're working on 3 different tracks. First of all, there was obviously the immediate crisis and being there for the travel community in Helsinki. The second point that I haven't heard so much in the travel industry discussion is actually kind of like seeing this as an opportunity of creating something new, taking this horrible situation as a kind of like chance to create some kind of communication about the destination. And we've specifically worked around virtual experiences and virtual events that have grown rather big, actually. And then the third point that I see hugely important is the work you do around future and really understanding, and not only where the tourism industry is going, but actually understanding where the world is going. So a very strong kind of like foresight. We studied the foresight work the day one of the crisis, actually, really understanding. Yeah, but understanding that how the world is changing and how the customer behavior is changing and what kind of world do we think that we're facing after the crisis. But we're doing also we will be campaigning locally. I mean, we are campaigning locally. We will run a major campaign in national campaign this year. Mm-hmm. And also I think it's really important to be there for the industry. I mean, to have the webinars, the calls, the kind of like ongoing dialogue with the industry.
The continuous presence.
Yeah.
So if from day one you've been exploring where the world is going, do you have the answer for everyone else?
No, not yet. But I strongly believe that it's the customer behavior will change radically. And there's the we don't stop traveling, of course, but the way we travel will be different. It will be a lot more value based. It's kind of like it needs to be aligned with the values that we stand for, and we need to be better in communicating that. What do we stand for as destinations? So what do we bring with us as destinations, and how do we understand the beliefs and the needs of those people around the world, and how do we target then the marketing and communications activities to those people? So in long term, I do believe that there will be a strong change in the travel industry in this after the crisis.
Mm-hmm. So you're on the next normal team.
Oh yeah.
There's a question here actually from Jaume from Visit Valencia, which I think I'd be curious to ask you, Michael, because it tapped into some of the discussions we had before this panel. But it's the question is, suddenly due to the pandemic, many governments and residents have realized how important is tourism for our day-to-day lives. Do you feel that there is an increasing attention to the value of tourism in your dialogues with policymakers, government? And will that help moving forward?
Oh, well, yeah, I absolutely agree, because everybody now, we were having a lot of talks before the crisis about our tourism, not in Hamburg, but Rovnik and Barcelona, wherever you guys all know that. And now everybody realizes how a city looks like without tourists, and how important they are for the small business units, the shops, the restaurants, whatever. So I think there's new focus on tourists, and especially the link between the focus and the life quality in the city. But frankly, also speaking, I think we will in Germany talking a lot of the tie and access to politician makers and decision makers. And in a time where there's a lot of prosperity and a lot of growth, it's annoying. It's not so good, it's annoying, and you talk about how can you find a solution. In a crisis like this, you realize this is killing us. If you don't have access to decision makers and politicians, really, and tourism is not on the priority list, then you're the last one to get under the rescue parachute. And you're the last one who gets awareness for the problems. And so this is something I think we still need to work on as an industry for the next years to have access. This is a strategic task for us, I think. And we cannot be satisfied with the solution or the situation we do have right now. There is focus on the industry, and they realize how important it is, but also money is spread out to everybody at the moment. And a city like Hamburg is really characterized by the diversity, and the diversity comes from the small businesses, which are unique and which you don't find anywhere else. And we've spoken before this panel about it. Are these the guys who know how to fill out the papers? Are these the guys who's the management level and the management skill is there really to survive this crisis? I don't think so. But we need this to create or still have a city which is diverse and to attract people, and also to have this link between Hamburg people and their city inhabitants, because this is what they are looking for, which makes it unique.
And do these small businesses, the ones that you're talking about, do they look to you for advice, or are you a role for, what do you say, like, are you not an authority, but are you a relevant partner to them, do you feel?
I think more than ever. I think we've always been a very highly valued partner. And one reason for this was, let's say, local patriotism, and we're all Hamburg people and we want to bring the city forward. But now there's a must to cooperate with us, because we are the ones who can have a lighthouse function, who can give orientation, who can interpret data and research results. Because everything before was like a truth. I mean, there was a truth that most people from outside countries come from Denmark to Hamburg. And now it's not secure anymore. And it's not secure that there will be growth. So I think there's more need than ever to cooperate with us. And there's more will of the partners to partner with us to find solution, even from partners who were not so much linked to us, like the restaurant, the gastronomy scene. They were dependent on tourists, but there was no close link because it was prosperity all over. And now they realize, no, we need to cooperate, but we also need to deliver them. They put their hopes in us to give orientation, to do campaigning, to help them get business back. And as Miguel said, focus on inhabitants of the city. Absolutely agree to that. But I'd say the hunt for a scapegoat is the easiest hunt. So there's a big chance. But we also need to deliver. If we don't deliver, we are in deep trouble.
you're either savior or scapegoat once you venture down that road. Yeah. How, Miguel, do you also see that? We have a question for you about over-tourism. Do you think that Madrid will go back to the over-tourism situation they had before? Or will there be a new sort of tourism emerging in the city now that perhaps people want to visit nature areas more too? And I'd tap that question over into also the scapegoat. Like, how do you rebuild for success of your organization as well? And is it, what does that require from you not to go back or repeat the past years?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that Madrid had a very deep over tourism problem before, but we saw other cities that had it, so we were worried about it. But the problem now, I think, is, of course, there were demand for travel will be lower for for the time being, not just because of the pandemic. Once it is over, people have discovered substitutes to travel. Like, we are meeting now 75 people, and we don't need to travel, and it's convenient and it's easy, and we got used to it. So next time we have to meet, maybe we say, oh, it's not that we can't, is that it's easier, or we are more used to this type of meeting. So that will affect travel. And the problem is that we will all be hunting for visitors, which might have, some of those visitors might have little or negative added value to the city, to the citizens' well-being, to economic growth, to natural resources, to whatever. So what is the point of hunting for visitors which are not, they do not have positive externalities to the city or to the destination? And we'll be pressed by our partners and the hoteliers and the little bars and the restaurants. Oh, bring just anyone will do. But in the long term, it might not do, and it might not do. It might have little added value, as I said. So we have to look, how do we readapt our destinations? And you talked about natural. Now people would prefer more natural or open air destinations. So Madrid has, within its region and within it's 15 kilometers from the city, we have a national park. So maybe that will become part of our destination. It has never been, truly. It was there, but we never thought it was key or strategic. Well, maybe it will be now, if that adds value to Madrid as a destination. We might be a scapegoat. Yes, we are. Everyone is like, bring tourists. It just doesn't, anyone will do. We need the business. And we say, okay, but we're still looking for the right type of visitor. Now, it is true that for these, first phase, or for the very short term, anyone will do, because what we need to do is to start the engine or restart the engine. And to restart the engine, we need people coming in. But we need to keep focus, I think. And we need to keep focus on what is our destination. And if we are a destination that whose goal is to increase the citizens' way of life, our living standards, and the quality of the experience of the people that come to the city, because they are both linked.
And I'm curious about that, because I think also it taps into what Laura was talking about, value-based tourism. But how will you approach that with the quality of the visitors or the tourists? Like you say about the attracting the, I don't know if you didn't say the right kind of tourists, but the tourists that somehow support and sustain the values of Madrid and the community you want. How are you approaching that question?
Well, I think that depends on how do you partner and who do you choose to partner with. I mean, now we have to restart connectivity. Do we partner with low-cost carriers to bring mass tourism, or do we partner with long-haul carriers? It won't be black or white. It will also, everything has shades of gray, and we will have to manage the balance to restart the destination, but with a focus on the long-term strategy. So for us, a long-haul traveler is more sustainable than a short-haul one-day traveler. So we have to keep that is one of our priorities still.
Yeah. Okay. There's a question for all of you. So now I'm going to make this experiment and ask the question and then see how we do this. And whoever feels most strongly can answer. But there are actually two questions that I think we can put together. The first question is a little bit on that there are many different understandings of the word sustainability. It can be in the meaning of lasting or longevity of your company, resilient for the whole sector, or resilience for the whole sector, or ecologically sustainable. So that's like maybe you can answer how you see sustainability as part of your answer now. But then I'd say the key question here is, at your destination, how is sustainability discussed? Is it actually all three components or dimensions of environmental, social, and economic?
Yes.
Laura, yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah.
Cool. I like it.
Very, very much so. And well, for the case of Helsinki, it all starts with the city strategy. We have a decision made by the politicians that the city will be carbon neutral by 2035. We will diminish the emissions by 60% in the next 10 years. And this is a big challenge, and we need to be part. I mean, travel industry needs to be part of that solution. How to make that happen? So it's not the case of what we do as a company, or not what the hotels or the travel industry does alone, but the whole, when there is enough stakeholders taking the steps to the same direction, the change will happen. And we need to be part of the bigger vision or the bigger strategy that the city is dealing. And of course, it needs to be all three approaches in line.
Do you see a different weight across those three dimensions? I think that was part of the questions we've seen.
Okay.
Dolphins and canals and flamingos in Bombay and all that. And is there a difference in how we weigh those three dimensions?
Well, we've been most focused on the ecological aspect of the sustainability so far, but to be kind of like to be truly to have the credibility from all stakeholders, it needs to be looked through the three lenses of sustainability.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm gonna, Michael, do you want to answer as well?
Yeah, well, we also talk definitely about the three dimension, but I'd say maybe there are two more aspects important. First is this crisis is like a magnifying glass. So every weak structure is going to be hit more than a strong structure. So the economical side of sustainability will also contain how to keep the city alive and how to keep this diversity, so how to support the small business units, I think. And the other one is, personally, I don't think this was the last pandemic for the next 10 years. I think it's maybe just the beginning of more to come. So how resilient is a city, and what defines resilience of a city? And I think this is a huge issue also to market a city. Hamburg has been always a commercial town, a very strong, very good structure, industry. So building up resilience, maybe it's also a sustainable question, because it's a very long-lasting forward question.
Right. All right. So I don't understand why people say they're sick of digital meetings. I feel like time is running much more quicker in these formats. Everything, but we're already running out of time. So Miguel, do you want to add something on that last question that all three of you?
Yeah. I think both dimensions, I mean, the three dimensions are very important, but we have to take into account that the social dimension has shifted. So now the social dimension is to get people to work. At least in the short run, it's from okay, we need to to coordinate so people are not distressed by tourism or over tourism. But now we need people from Madrid to get a job, to go back to work. Economically, we need our businesses not to die. So those dimensions in the very short term, at least, have shifted. And we cannot hide one thing. Dolphins were seen in Venice, but also Venetians were seen in St. Mark's Square. And that was rare.
Yeah.
And people will notice that they can behave differently in their cities because they don't have tourists. And people will look that rents are going down because there is no pressure on because of vacational rentals. So these things have to be taken into account when developing a new the new model, because people will know. I mean, people in Madrid are seeing that rental prices for apartments in city center are going down. Why? Because there are no tourists.
Yeah.
So for some people, so this, and I'm finished with this.
Sorry.
For many people, there are winners and losers, and they will be. And we need to DMOs. We need to make this a whole city thing, not for winners and losers of tourism.
I'm going to finish with the challenge of you only get to answer really shortly on this question, and it's the question behind me. So if you have to look 12 months ahead and you don't get to look any further ahead or any shorter, in 12 months, will we feel like we're back to normal, or will we feel like we're in a next normal? Laura, I think I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to ask you first.
The short answer, next normal. Next normal. Michael?
Next normal, definitely.
Miguel?
Yeah, same, next normal. Yeah.
Ah, but it wasn't as clear as that when we asked all the participants in here. Listen, I could talk to you for a very long time, but we're already past the time. But thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts on this. Very, very interesting.
Thank you.
Then there is one question remaining, and it's on hygiene. And I'm actually going to take that question as my chance to make a small commercial, because next week I will be interviewing the CEO of MKG Consulting, who just launched a new big report on worldwide sanitary initiatives. And so I'll be interviewing him on all the different initiatives and measures that industry and destinations have taken on hygiene and sanitation. So hopefully there'll be an answer to that question in that interview. And with that, I'm going to finish today's webinar. Thank you so much to all the panelists. And thank you also to Megan, who I can no longer see. And thank you everyone who tuned in and joined and asked questions. Hope to see you soon. Bye.